Hello world and welcome back. This is not another episode of Let's Play Bioshock Blind, but I realized after I finished the game in the last episode that I had these director's commentary to listen to, and so I was going to play some of those for you guys. It looks like I didn't unlock a lot of them, but I'm going to play what I did. So, Behind the Pitch is one.
Bioshock was groundbreaking in many regards
So,
when it
I'm going to
released
let
in
this play out
2007,
too.
though fundamentally it shared many
I'm probably not
consistencies
going to talk
with the
a whole lot
rational
during
System
this,
Shock
though.
series. What elements of System Shock translated into Bioshock, and what was refined, altered, and innovated upon to create the world of Rapture?
Just because I want you guys to hear it all and
System Shock to Bioshock.
listen to it. So, and I kind of want to listen to it too. If I have anything to say, I'll say it at the end of these.
Everyone knows where the game ended up, but I think fans would be interested to learn where this game or the idea of doing this game started. And I think, folks know System Shock and the legacy of that game, huge fan base. Did it start as a System Shock game initially?
No, I mean, because we didn't have the rights to that,
Yeah.
right? We kind of felt that there was more game design to mine there. That it was sort of, we did that one game, and it was sort of the first game that really combined shooting and RPG, and it was a very small budget. It was a very small team, and it was the first game we had ever done. So we got pretty lucky, I think, in terms of how well it came out. But but the odds were sort of stacked against it, and the team was really enthusiastic about doing a game like that. And time had evolved, and the team was much more. We had done a bunch of games together, and we had a stable technology base, and we were like, okay, well, which System Shock 2 was not. I mean, that engine, no game had ever shipped on that engine. It was a very crude piece of technology. Most of us had never shipped a game at the time. So, well, what if we had a stable technology base, and we had a team that was more experienced and more seasoned, and we had, an actual, like our director, and which we didn't really have on System Shock 2. What could we do? And so I think there was a lot of enthusiasm in the team to really try to do a more mature version of that kind of game. This is before we had sold the company to Take-Two, and we were an independent developer, right? We were sitting there, we were using the money we made from other development deals we had, and we would try to scrape together whatever time and money we had to work on this thing. And it was not actually something I was particularly keen on doing. The team was much more keen on doing a sort of a System Shock-ish game than I was, because...
That's your pitching, right? Like System Shock 3 at one point, right?
Well, I mean, there was an actual System Shock 3 that we were pitching
Okay.
back in the day when we were right after System Shock 2, but that never happened.
Right, yeah.
We couldn't get anybody interested, because System Shock 2 sold like 5 copies, right? And so, as the business guy, the guy who had to not only just sort of write the content, but the guy who had to go out and get the deals and pay everybody, I wasn't particularly excited about doing this, because it was very disappointing when we did System Shock 2 and nobody bought it. It got great reviews, it got these insane reviews, but it left us in a place where it didn't really move the needle for us in terms of making payroll. So I wasn't super excited about it, because I didn't see a publisher be interested in it, and I didn't see the audience actually be particularly interested in this kind of game. And it was really the team who convinced me to invest in this, because their enthusiasm. I think a lot of them came to the studio because of System Shock 2. And so finally they sort of battered me down. And it's good they did, because I was not the first fan of doing this.
And I know initially there was something called the Serene Dawn. That was a spaceship? Or what was that?
No, that was
the name of a cult, right?
Cult.
Yeah. Sorry, okay.
That one's, I think, been lost to the... If I remember correctly, Serene Dawn was a cult. You were playing as a deprogrammer that was infiltrating the cult, and your name happened to be Carlos Coelho, who was one of our programmers at the time.
It's named after him, yeah. Then there was a story notion that I always really found interesting, which was that you have these cults, and you have sometimes people who they're these sort of characters who are really live on the edge of the gray morality, which is these guys who come in and essentially kidnap people out of these cults or rescue them, depending on how you look at it. Because what it really is, from a functional standpoint, it's a kidnapping, right? You're coming to an adult, and you're saying, you're hired by their parents or whoever. And this was in the story. It was like a senator whose daughter joined one of these religious movements called the Serene Dawn. You said,
Yeah,
the
Serene
Serene
Dawn,
Dawn. And I always thought that was a really interesting tension of this hero who's basically a kidnapper, and taking a young woman against her will out of the place that she was in. Now, you could also make the other argument that, well, she was not really there by her will. But there's a really interesting conversation that goes on there. I think there was actually a Kate Winslet movie, a Harvey Keitel Kate Winslet movie, which dealt with a similar theme. Because usually you hear that story, these deprogrammers as a sort of heroic kind of notion. But I always thought that, well, there's something interesting about agency going on there, and about are people entitled to make bad mistakes, or is it a bad mistake? It all depends on the person. And I'm not a fan of religious cults or religion in general, but there seemed to be an interesting discussion of freedom there and independent decision making, and I thought that idea was cool, and that was sort of the basis of it for a while. But it was really mostly for the purpose of, we needed something to go out and pitch to publishers, and so we know we didn't have a ton of time to really develop it. So that sounded like, all right, this will do for now.
And was that pre-Underwater City? I mean, this was just like an idea for a story.
We may have stepped away from that to do the cult thing, but then we went back to the underwater.
No, we had that one room, remember?
We had the one World War II room with the roaches on the ground and like these weird test tube things that you could walk around. I don't know where that fell. It could have been underwater. There was no windows.
The thing is, we were a small business, right? And we were trying to figure out a way to sell this thing with spending the least amount of money, because we didn't have any money. We don't have a pot to piss in. So we would do this demo. That was one room basically, just to show. And I'd write up a document, and we'd take it around. I'd fly around the country, be like, "Here's our room." It was a different time, And
we had just come off of SWAT 4. One of the advantages we had is that we were so familiar with that engine at that point that we could really start cranking through small rooms and lighting and making things look good. So
I took it on the road to sell it to somebody, and nobody cared. We'd go to a publisher, and look, they have to make money, right? And then we'd say, oh, it's sort of a spiritual successor to System Shock 2, and they'd be like, well, how did that sell? And I'd be like, my mom likes it, and they would be like, well, we can't, and usually we'd be talking to a fan. A lot of executives, like sort of junior executives, were fans of System Shock, and they'd go to their boss and they'd be super excited, and their boss would open up, their Excel spreadsheet and be like, "No, we can't do this." And I think the pitch probably evolved as we kept trying different permutations trying to sell, but we were also out there trying to sell like 2 or 3 other things at the time. We had a pitch for a game called Monster Island, and
well, our SWAT 5 pitch was
Zombie SWAT.
Yeah, we had just come off of SWAT 4, which is like hardcore tactical, and we decided they wanted us to do another SWAT, and we didn't really want to do another hardcore tactical game, so we're like, what if we added zombies to SWAT? Like, you're a SWAT team that fights zombies and werewolves. That sounds awesome. And it was like, no, it doesn't.
And this is before, before zombies were a thing.
Yeah.
And so we came up with this thing called Division 9.
Division 9, yeah.
That probably would have been even a bigger financial success than Bioshock.
Wow.
But we couldn't get anybody interested in it.
We didn't have enough werewolves in the demo, I think.
We had 0 werewolves in the demo. Yeah, we were going to have werewolves, weren't we?
Werewolves and vampires. That was the
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Werewolves,
the whole,
vampires,
like,
zombies?
just throw it
Okay,
all the Universal Studios monsters from like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what happened is we couldn't sell it, but we were always sort of independent minded. And so I said, well, what if we sort of did this in reverse? Instead of getting a publisher first and then doing a press tour on it, what if we sort of did the press first?
Yeah.
And we called up a guy, Andrew Park, who's at GameSpot at the time, who was a fan of System Shock 2 and a great guy. And I said, will you come out and look at this thing we're doing and write a story on it? And he was like, sure. And Andrew flew out, and we showed him what we had, which is this very, very rudimentary thing about an underwater base. And he wrote up an article and sort of featured as that this is the spiritual successor to System Shock 2. And the next day, the phone started ringing from publishers who now all of a sudden saw the article was getting all this pickup and all these comments, and people were excited. And that really, I think, put it over the top in terms of being able to sell it, even though it was not Bioshock at that point. It was called Bioshock, but it was not Bioshock. There would have been I don't think there would have been a game. We never would have sold it without Andrew coming out doing that.
My belly's full of angel's blood.
I hope you guys like these. I find them very interesting, and I'm sorry I'm not talking during these, but I just want to take it all in and have you guys take it all in too. And I didn't unlock them all, but I'm going to play the ones that I did unlock. Again, I hope you guys are liking these. You'll have to tell me in the comments if you don't, and I just won't show them. Well, I won't show the rest of them is what I meant. Alright, here's the next one, A World of Thieves.
Rapture is overflowing with memorable locations and set pieces. In developing a world that feels organic, lived in, and functional, Irrational managed to create a space that feels perfectly suited to the story and action that takes place in it, which begs a question: did the plot shape the location, or did the plot fit squarely into a world that was already established?
Let's talk about some of the areas in Rapture, because it's an amazing place, but also it feels like there's certain areas that are very well designed, and that they have, a very certain aesthetic, and the characters in there, it all kind of comes together. Ken, do you have a part of Rapture that resonates the most with you still to this day?
I think the opening is always going to be the most important to me because it's we spent a lot of time there, and it was all for me as a challenge as a narrative guy is sort of how do we set up a very complex series of events and a very complex notion and all this, Andrew, with so much to tell, Big Daddies and Little Sisters and Andrew Ryan and the time period and do that all without cutscenes. And especially, I think, the descent to Rapture when you get in the bathysphere, getting that right, getting everything right down to the bathysphere, cresting the hill and seeing the city for the first time. Remember how much we worked on the timing of that, just getting that.
And it took us forever to figure out that we should just put the slide projector covering the window. Again, in hindsight, it seems like such an obvious choice, but we were really trying to figure out how are we going to tell this story of Ryan, and then reveal so you can see the city beyond the hill.
And also, we didn't have to show the whole transition going down to the bottom of the ocean because the whole screen was covered.
Spoiler alert.
I think that's the part that will always be near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was Kashmir.
Yeah.
That was one of the first.
The restaurant at the beginning.
Yeah, the restaurant at the beginning, because it was really the first art box that we created that was Rapture. I mean, we created spaces before that weren't really hitting the Art Deco look. Scott Sinclair had just started, and he built that designed and built that statue of the Atlas with the world on his shoulders that was in the middle of the room. And Mauricio had done some concept art for us of that space. And once we started putting everything together and getting it into Engine and actually walking around it and seeing those giant windows off to the side that just showed the seascape and really drove home the fact that you're underwater. It was the first time really all the elements started to come together.
And we had built a bunch of stuff, and we actually stepped back and said, we have to just get one room right before we go any further, because we weren't getting it right. And so Mauricio did that concept drawing. Yep. We worked really hard on that statue, and that statue, I think, was the first object we really built in the game that was a Bioshock. So we just stayed in that room for a month until we got it right.
And I think the original concept actually had a tram running through it.
Did.
So it was even more complicated, and that was one of those things where we had to keep pulling back to really focus on what the bare essence of that room was.
Were there parts of Rapture that you never were able to realize that you sort of still miss? The zoo. People talk about Fort Frolic, right?
That I was excited about. Not everybody was excited about the zoo, but I don't know why I was excited about the zoo, because it would have been a nightmare. We had another area that was prior to Arcadia that was more of a straight up agriculture, forest type of area.
Before we had the bathyspheres, we had a whole sort of subway transport system in Rapture, which we spent a lot of time thinking about, and then just realized that these little submersibles would be a much more realistic and much better solution.
And you were going to be able to move between locations in that subway system?
Yeah, much like the bathyspheres, but they were much more integrated throughout the space, and we really want to support them. And we just realized it was not really relevant to what we were doing.
Were there certain locations or areas where you knew a certain narrative point, needed to happen? Like you look at, the reveal of sort of Atlas's true motivations. Was that oh, we've got to do it this level because it fits the story? or was it more that you sort of like you had the game laid out in a certain order and you just layered the story on top of it?
I think the big one I can think of is that you encounter Ryan in his sort of like that he would live in an area of industry.
Okay.
You know, so he lives in this very industrial area because that's where he would feel most comfortable. And that we wanted his office, his lair, to sort of be not in some, you know, residential zone, but where he wants to wake up and smell the grease fires and, you know, and the machines and the smoke. That's in his lifeblood. Industry is his lifeblood.
But it also had to be very theatrical. Like if you look at it now, it doesn't look like an office. You kind of know it's an office because the story is telling you that.
Set,
and we had some old technology that was laying around in the game that would control environment settings. So old system that we had would let you do high pressure, low pressure, medium pressure, and those would affect lighting and other like post-process things in the world. And that was a system that was cut, but because the code was in, we were always trying to figure out ways to use it. And one of the ways that we used it was in the Andrew Ryan sequence, because we didn't have a lot of narrative storytelling tools. We were basically switching the atmosphere to get all the lighting changes. So whenever a light changes in that scene, we're telling the game that the atmosphere is changing. So, and then the preset atmospheres come in and shine the spotlights on them or bring up the house lights when we need them to.
It was very, very early on. You could change the pressure in the areas, and that would change how explosions worked and all this stuff like that. And we just couldn't figure out how to make it gettable for the player. We couldn't make it feedback, but we still had all those. That moved a lot of levers in the game, so we still had the system. So we used it for the sort of theatrical cues of the, you know, very theatrical cues of Ryan appearing, the lights going down where you are, and the lights coming up where he is, because the engine didn't have those tools by default.
The assassin has overcome my final defense, and now he's come to murder me. In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
And there was a great sense of sort of artistic progression as you went through the game too, and that, you know, each level had its own sort of voice. Was that something that, you know, a lot of games as they move further in development, it's like, oh, we sort of ran out of time. We can, you know, it's like we're just going to sort of repeat this and change the color palette. It felt like, I mean, for the team, it was very defined from early on that you wanted each sort of level, which they were levels back in the day, to feel distinct.
Yeah, I mean, we had sort of experimented with that back on System Shock 2, back when every Doom level looked pretty much like every other Doom level, because they were just sort of working on the same set of assets. We decided with our very rudimentary tools in System Shock 2 that we would progress with color, and every deck would feel different from a color standpoint, even though most of that was lighting, or textures, nothing really more. But we have the tools to actually, you know, sort of theme levels. I think a lot of this goes back to, I think my first memory was actually from when I was 1 year old at the Montreal World Expo.
Remember when you were 1?
Well, I remember being at something at this World's Fair, which I didn't realize, I think was in 1967, when I was 1 year old, a little over 1 year old. Wow. And I was on a theme park ride they had and I remember being at this thing where a big bat flies out of this sort of thing and comes up. I don't know why I was a 1 year old was on this ride. I'm not sure, sort of a haunted housey kind of ride. And I remember loving it. And I think that stuck with me. So the notion of sort of theme parky themes and settings, and Disney World does a great job with this. You go to Disney World, they theme areas. So themed areas were something that always resonated with me. And Bioshock sort of always has had this notion of feeling of theme in different areas, much more than the real world has. Like you walk from building to building, most of them you can't really tell them apart. You walk from walk from a floor of an office building to another floor. It's not going to look any different. But we always felt that was really important.
And there's also, I mean, if you look at SWAT 4, saw some early experiments with this, especially like the serial killer's house level in SWAT 4. Just probably one of the most dense levels that we shipped, but you were trying to tell a specific story with that. And going straight into Bioshock and using the same exact engine that we were using, and we were very comfortable at that point with how the engine worked and how to art up these rooms, gave us a leg up when we sat down and really thought about what stories are we specifically trying to tell. And one of my favorite anecdotes from this time period is with Sander Cohen. I think it was Nate Wells and Stephen Alexander sat down one night, and they came up with a backstory for every dead body that you find in that space, and then they told that story with the props that they could. Even if it was just like this guy crawled 3 feet and then shot himself in the head because he was sad about something, you know, they put those marks in, maybe put a picture next to the guy, and then he shot himself. So they really like did their homework and tried to add, you know, the backstory for everything that you're going to find in that space.
I've got Atlas's goons hitting us non-stop and 2 dead mechanics just this week. We need to control costs. If I wanted to deal with amateurs, I would have stayed on dry land.
Okay, I'm out of time for this episode, and like I said, I hope you guys are enjoying these. If not, just let me know in the comments, and I just won't post the second video of this. But in the next video, we'll watch these last 2, and then I will be done with this. So I want to thank you all for watching, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye-bye.